Welcome back to the Belonging Place, where we focus on connection and community and belonging. And I'm excited to have my friend and guest, Kyle Barth. Welcome, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a little while since we've been able to talk. Okay, so the first thing that I usually ask people is just like, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing is I'm a dad. If there's
Okay.
one thing I want to be known by, it's that. And kind of an entrepreneur, background working in the therapy field, operate a private practice. I've done some work with some video production companies, some mental health tech companies, and really just love helping people make connections in their life and making a difference.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we met. I haven't really talked about residential treatment at all on my
Oh,
podcast.
yeah.
So I actually was like, man, I'm going to ask Kyle to kind of describe, like, so let's say people in the audience don't really have any bearing on
hmm
like a continuum of care or like what that is. Maybe tell us a little bit about, and you can specifically talk about Telos if you want, but I'm more
hmm
looking for just like a general, like, what, like, why residential? What is that?
Yeah, so there's different levels of treatment. Like normally when people think of therapy, oftentimes they're thinking of like outpatient
Mhm.
therapy and going meeting with a therapist. There's also like IOP, like intensive outpatient therapy. I may go and meet with a therapist several times a week or group therapy practices and, be working at the prescriber. And then higher level of cares from there, there's partial hospitalization and then residential, which is
Okay.
kind of a step down from hospitalization as well. And typically when someone goes into a residential level of care, it's because the structure, the support has been insufficient for them. Like to function, to get the help or support they need, there hasn't been enough structure to create the change they need. And so when someone goes into a residential setting, it's kind of a wraparound care support. I'm going to get my therapy support, my medical support, my life coaching support, my education support kind of all in one place. That's a lot more integrated than a lot of outpatient providers trying to collaborate.
Yeah, so I am curious. You're in grad school.
Mhm.
You're getting a master's in family therapy,
Yep.
and you are like deciding what you want to be when you grow up as a therapist.
hmm
And you land. I'm not sure. Like,
hmm
tell me, is this like I calculated I want to go in residential, or is it this is the job that I want? Talk to me a little bit about,
Yeah.
because with an MFT, usually people think I'm gonna go do couples
hmm
counseling,
Yep.
right? Okay, so
hmm
talk to me a little bit about where you're at, Kyle, and why you're like, oh, I think I'm gonna go do this.
Yeah. So this is fun. I started a PhD program. So I completed my master's degree and then started a PhD that was family science, research focused, and I was planning on becoming a university professor.
Okay, I
I
forgot that. I
started
forgot
that
that. I remember now that you.
and I quickly realized I was like, I want nothing to do with a career in academia. There's wonderful people, it just didn't fit me. And so I became a dropout. I dropped out of a PhD program and I started applying for a clinical job. So I interviewed at several places and was offered a role as a clinical director at a domestic violence shelter, actually.
Okay.
And then I had some friends in graduate school that were line staff at Telos, actually. So they
I did
introduced me to
actually know that. Okay.
Telos and I learned all about kind of their model, their vision. And that's what connected me there more than so much like I want to work in residential
Okay.
treatment.
Did you have like really any clue or bearing or knowledge or doing an internship or anything in residential?
No, that was my first experience into residential treatment.
Okay, and like full transparency,
hmm
like what did you think? How did you feel? Like when you look back, I mean, looking back is very different than like
Yeah.
coming up in, but
Yeah. So looking back, right? So Kylie and I were the first therapists hired at this startup residential treatment facility, but also with a program in Telos that was well established in the field.
like maybe when we started, they had been like 18 years or something,
Yeah.
16 years or something
16 years
with
and
teens.
with teens and
And they decided to do young adults.
yeah.
Okay.
So we jumped in and like working at basically like a startup company in essence and a brand new program with full students immediately day one. Like it was
Full caseload.
overwhelming, stressful, and for so much growth. Like I look back at that and I grew so much as a therapist. and had such great support and training and people around me that I think it really propelled my growth, like clinically and professionally. That I don't know if, like, at this point in my career, I'd want to go back and work in a residential setting as a therapist. That being said, I don't know if I would change that because of the personal development and just the clinical skill set and the deep relationships like you develop, like working with people, students and their families for such a long period of time in deep levels. Like, it's so rewarding. It's
Yeah, so rewarding. And like, so when you're in residential, you basically work with resistant clients,
yeah,
meaning they don't necessarily want to do therapy.
no,
Though I've never had a conversation with you specifically that I'm going to have right now. Though it's interesting to me when I look back. So I was in residential for about 16 years total,
hmm,
starting in a wilderness program. But I pretty much my whole career up till
yeah,
recently was residential in some form or another. I
hmm,
worked at a therapeutic boarding school. I did wilderness. I did, um, but and I always worked with resistant clients, though I never, like, in my actual office doing therapy, there were only a few clients that really just didn't do the work, that just didn't
hmm,
like do therapy. I'm curious about your experience working in with resistant clients, like how you felt, like behind the
yeah.
door with them doing therapy, or with the parents, or
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there were probably only a few people who actually didn't want help, right? Though the resistance, I think, was so strong for so many reasons, like bad experiences in therapy previously, hadn't made the progress I'd like it's hard to
my
be in
parents are
treatment.
forcing me.
Yeah, and so there was just so many barriers to overcome, which did make it really challenging. Um, but also really rewarding. And therapy just looked very different. Like when and from any other setting I've done therapy in, because you also played so many roles as a therapist, right? Individual therapy,
So
family
many hats,
therapist, parent
yeah.
coach, right? Kind of a case manager. And so it kind of pivoting through all that also made things tricky at
Which
times.
is wild, because I have a case manager now that I work with, and I am just like, wow, how did I? And she said the other day, you've never had a case manager? I was like, no, it's
Oh,
16 years of residential.
yeah.
I don't know if that's normal, if other residential programs have them, but because because you usually have direct care staff, and we were lucky. We also had these life coaches
Hmm.
in addition. Not everybody does in residential. And then you usually have some medical, and, and everyone's sort of there. I think everyone wears so many different hats, but like, what a wild experience. So one of my favorite things about the situation that we were like thrown into is that were you provisionally licensed when you came to Telos?
Yeah. So an associate
Yeah,
license. Yep.
yeah.
Hmm.
Just like the lingo, basically,
Yep.
like you have to work a couple years in the field, under supervision, in any licensure. Like I'm an LCSW and you're an MFT. So you came to Telos and like just brand new,
Hmm.
like got your badge basically while you were there, and
Yep.
I didn't. I was like a 6, 7, 8 year like therapist, not like a veteran, but not like new. And
Yeah.
I had come from a terrible situation before. My best friend described it really well. She was like, the last place you worked at, like, plucked your petals, like took everything that you had
Yeah.
and left nothing for you. And so when I got to Telos, I felt like they really grew me, planted me, put in, like,
Hmm.
invested in me. Anyway, I was super impressed. This is not just to like stroke your ego, but I was super impressed. They could do no wrong. No one could do no wrong, because I felt like I went from a terrible relationship to like a really loving relationship. So I was kind of dealing with my own, just like, this is great. But watching you as like a brand new therapist, just like get in there and tackle, and the clients that we were working with very specifically. So it's not just like, oh, we're working with troubled teens, or we're working
Yeah.
Tilo at our demographic is also just like a very unique, I want to say difficult, but I don't know, like,
Hmm.
that's an okay word, but difficult.
Yeah.
We were working with students on the spectrum. We were working specifically with processing issues, so just the ability to like communicate information and work is already difficult.
Yeah.
And then we process addiction, right? So
Mm,
particularly like screen gaming, stuff like that. So um, I'm guessing you didn't have a ton of experience in that before.
mhm,
And I didn't either. And so we both became, I think, like really good and
mhm,
specialists in these areas that we didn't even really know anything about. And anyway, I just want to say it was pretty magical for me across the aisle, because for a while it was
mhm,
just you and me, and then we added some more therapists to watch you grow and as a therapist. And the other thing that I want to say about that is if anybody knows both Kyle and I feel like we couldn't be more
yeah,
opposite.
personality, yeah, it's
Oh,
funny.
but what about you? Like, I don't know how much you valued me because of that, but I will just
Yeah,
say, and then I'll let you answer. Um, a certain person, like therapeutic alliance in the therapy world is 80% of how well therapy goes, right?
mhm,
And when you sit in a room, like your energy, like there's nothing you can do about that. Like you can
mhm,
add or dampen or change your environment, which I did. I had low lighting and stuff, but I just kind of buzz and there's nothing I can do about that. I'm just kind of like, and I feel like you have this so calm, so chill, so just like it's infectious in its own way. And
mhm,
I found that so relieving because when we had a clinical director that would like assign students, there were just students I knew like I didn't even have to talk. I didn't have to do therapy and they would just be annoyed or they would just be like, there's too much energy in the room. And I'd be like, oh, they're gonna get assigned to Kyle. Hopefully they get
mhm.
assigned to Kyle. I don't know if there was reciprocal on the other end of like, but
Yeah,
yeah. How did you feel about the opposite? Like it was very clear that we were like very different personalities, right?
yeah. I think it's a strength. Those are kind of things I appreciate you sharing that. And like I think that's just the strength, right? And also recognizing my own personality and weaknesses with that. Like sometimes I can be hard to read initially. People get like this safe, calm presence and they're like, what is this guy thinking? Or like, and so
This
like
is true.
have to be like very intentional, like, and sometimes like more energetic that intentionally. And I think part of working with the neurodiverse clientele as well is it was like learning a whole new language. It was learning a whole new way to talk and to communicate and to break things down and to provide supports and accommodations. It was like,
And name things that were like on before unnameable. This was my other thing is like
yeah,
we tried really hard to sort of take a concept and name it at Telos, right? So then we could
yep,
like refer to it. But like in the world, nobody
hmm,
knew that name of that concept because we had like created it. I don't
yep,
know if you also were like, okay, we have this insight, we have
yep,
jargon, we have the language. But when
yeah.
I would tell other people about it, they were like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's that thing. But we had given it like a name.
Yeah, it's like they didn't teach me this in graduate school. Like, what is this, right? Um, and I think at the early times there too, also like just that relationship of seeing, like I can remember vividly so many times of like you have a long day walking out of the office, at the end of the day, I look over and I'm like, oh, there's Kylie. I have just like that support, right?
Yes.
And that strength in that relationship. And I think being able to just rely on other people who are different than you, and that's great. And I think is a great strength.
Yeah, and I think we're coming at a pretty positive approach. I mean, it's rough. I would say
Yeah.
that residential in the therapeutic world is, I mean, I think people probably, I don't even know if I want to say the word, but burn out or leave
Mhm.
or go. I mean, just the nature of it. And I also think there's been a kind of uh, a feeling out in the world about residential. There's been a lot of things going on, lots of different ideas. Sometimes I describe it to people as like the scene in Beauty and the Beast when they like all want to go kill the beast because they don't really know what the beast is, but they just want to go kill the beast. Sometimes I think this is what happens for not just residential, but like mental health that's
Mhm.
not like outpatient mental health, right? People just or wilderness would be included in that, other things. And it's interesting. I have always felt, and like we kind of took when we were at Telos and like an approach of just like a rising tide lifts all ships, right? Like everybody do
Mhm.
better, and then we can do better for clients.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy for parents and people to hear about the world of residential and be like, oh, that's evil and that's that. And one day I was talking to a friend who was actually kind of like, yeah, I don't know why we need it. And I was like, man, you don't know you need it until you need it.
Mhm.
And then parents are like, what do I do? And then there's this whole world that they enter. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, kids that really need to be removed from their circumstances and families that need some reprieve while they're learning skills and things like that. If we get rid of all of it, then those kids and those families are still in our communities and our churches and our
Mm-hmm.
schools. They still need the help. So there's this whole, I don't have the answer. I'm also not in residential anymore, but
Yeah.
I'm grateful for spaces and places that do it well,
Mm-hmm.
that have created, I think, generational healing, I guess I would say, like being able to do the work and be with families. And I started off as a therapist just wanting to work with teens
Mm-hmm.
and not really wanting to work with families because they were difficult. And maybe you have the opposite story because you wanted to work with couples,
Mm-hmm.
but then I fell in love with and can't see it done any other way to work with families when I'm working with teens. It's like a whole system, and like if you don't work with the whole system, like it doesn't quite work. I'm curious because you chose to be an MFT, I'm sure for a certain reason, and then you went
Mm-hmm.
into residential, and now you're doing well. I'll just let you answer what you're doing. I don't know
Yeah.
if you're specifically doing couples or if you're kind of doing an array, but
Yeah.
your arc. Oh
Arc.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in residential treatment, the one thing that I really loved, there's a lot of things I love. One thing I really loved and I was really good at was the family therapy component aspect of it, of really helping heal relationships and understand how to change interaction patterns and help parents adjust and these young adults adjust in ways that were more functional. And so that's something I've really loved, is that relationship component. So I mean, that's really what I do now. Like, I'm doing a lot of couples therapy, relationship focused work, and then like a trauma informed lens, so trauma therapy as well. But that deep intense relationship work, that's where I also believe a lot of healing comes, is that connection.
Yeah. And this is outside of being therapist and meeting as therapist, I think this is one of the areas that like we connect on. It's just like
Mhm.
the purpose of this podcast. But you also have a podcast, I think, really focused on relationships,
Mhm.
right? And of all kinds.
Yeah.
And connection, like and
Mhm.
and what it does, and also the stories that we tell. So another part of you mentioned kind of working in media companies, but
Mhm.
um one of the like fell in love with and have a crush on an organization that we both have in common called
Mhm.
Stiry, which is sort of the tagline, I think, is stories that
Mhm.
stir, right?
Yep.
And talk to me a little bit about how you came to be connected with Stiry, and more for me, like what it is about it. You're doing
Mm.
therapy and you're doing connections over here, and then some people might not would take a natural leap to like media and story.
Mhm.
But talk to me about, yeah, like why that and
Yeah. I think stories have the power to heal. Like, when we can listen longer than most people listen, we can sit in someone's experience and story with them, like, we're changed. Like, I have this belief we never meet the same person twice, just like you never step into the same river twice. They're always different. Things have changed. And so for me, like, sitting in people's stories and hearing that, like, it's not just inspiring, it's not just something that feels good, but it shifts perspectives. It creates these moments where we can start to see ourselves differently, understand ourselves and the world differently. And especially when people have a voice and start to open up about, not like the rah things are great, but like,
yeah.
I was suicidal, or I attempted suicide, or I had severe anxiety, or I have no idea what I'm doing, and I failed. And sharing those moments, that I think creates real connection. So that's what Sturry's about. And also, like, all the people behind the scenes, and you get to know them, it's like authenticity. It's like the power of storytelling in their own lives. And so helping share that and helping more people on a large scale experience that type of connection, I think that's powerful.
Yeah.
Um, when people are authentic and vulnerable in that way.
Yeah. And how did you make that connection? Like, how did you go from this to this?
Yeah. So, and initially, like, when I was kind of pivoting my career, I was a clinical director at a university. I was launching my therapy practice, and just I was hosting summits, doing a lot of collaboration. So I reconnected with Dan Davis, the founder at Sturdy. He was on a summit that I did. I hosted a summit, and he was one of the keynote speakers. I think you were a
Yeah, I
keynote
was on the
speaker
summit.
there as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so,
By the way, I just want to say, follow Kyle. We're gonna give you all the stuff below, in the liner notes. But
yeah.
also, I hope you do another one of these or upcoming things like
Mhm.
this, and like definitely attend. And they're awesome.
Yeah.
I'm biased, but I'm also like I get my
Yeah.
professional endorsement.
That's kind of you to say. And And so like in those moments, one thing I'd say too, like I think when people see this or experience this, when you're putting something together, hosting something, most of the time, no one has any idea what they're doing, right? Like you
Literally.
just run with it and create good experiences and learn as you go. And so, but that, I mean, that's what connected me to Stiry. And the more that I got to know Dan, personally, we got to know each other. There just came opportunities to kind of jump in and help Stiry. And that's looked a lot of different ways over the years, and it's been amazing to see Stiry grow from where it was to
Gosh, yeah.
distributing major feature-length films now.
Speaking of, you guys won, I think, 3 awards at the Zion's
Indie Film Festival.
Indie
Yep.
Film Festival. Okay, which were what? Do you know the?
Yeah, so we had 4 films that were there, and I am
So
gonna
3 of your 4.
yeah.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know how many.
So
I didn't know exactly how many you had. Yeah.
yeah, 2 Mountain Ops, and I wish I had all the titles in front of me.
It's okay.
Conquer More, and then Casey Scott's story, and with Miki Couture, there's one other Miki Couture, and then the Emily Effect. And yeah, so
And those topics are basically, there was a postpartum depression, right?
yeah,
And
postpartum depression, kind of changing alcoholism, kind of 2 from that, and addiction, and then 1 with a child who has Tourette's,
okay.
and kind of using adventure to
Yeah.
fuel his life.
So the host of that event is a friend of mine and been on the podcast, Sharon.
Oh, awesome.
And I watched a clip of Sharon, of Dan and Bran were like talking, and then they won the next word right after. So Sharon's like, and come back out around and like come get the next award. And I couldn't have been more proud. I have been an early adopter to Stiry and just love you guys, as you know. One thing that I noticed, Kyle, about you, and I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about it, is when I've gone to events with Stiry, when I've seen things, people know Dan's there, people know your producer's there, people are sort of present on like who is doing what. I know that you're involved in, and people know, and I know that we don't live in a world where like you feel the need that everyone needs to know, but I feel like often your role is sort of this behind the scenes container. How can I help? How can I do it? Steady, maybe not noisy, maybe not loud, but just like consistent. I find that, or I might call that like quiet dignity. I feel like I am ever reaching for that. My ADHD revved up system, my like need to want to just like devour stories and stuff sort of sometimes gets in the way of this, what I consider quiet dignity. I'm curious about how you see that yourself. Do you see that as a gift? Do you see that as, yeah, how do you see that? I don't even want to define it.
Yeah, I think it's a gift and a challenge, I'd say. So that's kind of my role a lot of the times. Like if there was a big party, I don't want to be in the center of the party. I would rather be off on the side having a meaningful conversation with a couple of people that's there. And kind of in all the organizations that I've been a part of for the most part, like that's the role that I play, like the calm, steady force on the side of the ship and helping things move forward.
Yeah.
So in one ways, right, that's a gift. I think the other challenging point is sometimes like you need to, whether it's have more energy or, step out more and be more assertive, which I can do. Though that like I would rather be the calm space over here than in the center of attention of everything.
And I imagine people like need that. I imagine that's a important role. I mean, I know in our relationship and our dynamic, there's like this yin and yang, right? I imagine there is like, if I were to ask people around that work with you, like they're almost dependent on that, right? There's this like balance that's needed for those who are like performing or out and for those who are behind the scenes. You mentioned a thing about you never meet the same people twice. And I'm going to read a quote that I have had at the end of my email. You might have read it before. I don't know. I don't always read other people's end of their emails, but I've had it for my most of all of my career. Like if I get a new email or whatever, this is what goes at the end of my where you sign your name, right? Okay. So let me, and I just want you to give me, oh man, I should have. Okay. It's by George Bernard Shaw, and it comes from Man and the Superman in 1903. I had become a new person, and those who knew the old person laughed at me. The only man who behaved sensibly was my tailor. He took my measure anew every time he saw me, whilst all the rest went in with their old measurements and expected them to fit me.
Mhm.
You kind of mentioned this earlier, but I would love to ask you a little bit more. Like, when you hear that and the thought that you made earlier, tell me more about what you think about that
Yeah.
idea or the.
I think we have to spend more time getting to know people. And I think this is also what sometimes can create one of the loneliest dynamics when it's like people don't know me. They knew who I was, but they don't know me now, or they don't want to know me. And oftentimes I think people have this fear and they phrase it differently, like, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, I'm
Mm,
not good enough. And the truth is, sometimes that's true. Sometimes, like, I'm too much, or what's happened to me is too much for other people to handle or hold space for. They don't know what to do with it. Sometimes I may not have the capacity to sit with someone else in the experience and their life, or I haven't always been the most lovable teddy bear at every moment of my life. Um, and when we, I think, try to prove those things wrong, or when we try to fix that or correct it or run from it, that's when it starts to create more problems. And it's kind of like that shame kicks in versus when I can accept that and I can feel the pain. I can experience the loneliness of like, I'm going through something and this is too much for someone else to handle.
mm,
That hurts. That hurts. They don't have the relationship that I want or I need, but I have to learn to love the relationship that I have and grieve that ambiguous loss of that other
mm,
relationship. And I think that opens up the door for more connection in our lives to ourselves first. And we can learn to love ourselves. And that oftentimes is contagious. Like we start to attract the people around us who do connect with us and
mm.
we're drawn to them. And there's
People come in or fall out,
authenticity.
right? Like,
Yeah. But it takes listening and it takes being willing to also embrace the new layers of ourselves. Like our belief systems work until they don't, until they're challenged to a degree that's like, I don't know about that anymore. And then we have
yeah.
to kind of refine and reevaluate and keep moving forward.
Yeah. So this idea that you're talking about is sort of like in a bigger world. So I'm going to shrink it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use us
Yeah.
as a dynamic of this because sometimes we see this as people like, "Oh, you knew me in high school and now I'm post grad school person."
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's when you know people parallel. So when I knew you the
Mm-hmm.
closest, you were married, of a
Mm-hmm.
certain faith, of a certain thing. You had a certain life.
Yeah.
And I only knew so much of that, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
were colleagues and stuff.
Yeah.
and and I don't want to prescribe this to you, but I feel like what I've watched in front of me, to the degree that I know it, was a lot of change.
Mm-hmm.
So in the last 4, 5 years,
Yeah.
there's been some huge shifts
Mm-hmm.
in your life. So like if I'm unaware of that or don't know any of
Mm-hmm.
that or didn't get shared or we didn't stay in connection and I carry the same Kyle, like, and I meet up with you and we're talking, I don't know you.
Mm-hmm.
And this I'm saying very personal to you because
Yeah.
you have shifted and you have changed and you've grown and you've grieved and you've learned. And if I'm not curious and I don't seek to understand or I don't just give you an opportunity to like check in where you're at, then I miss that. So I want to ask the same question, but I want you more on
Mm-hmm.
like a you level. So like this idea I imagine has happened to you in the last four or
Mm-hmm.
5 years because when people make changes, we don't usually announce. There's some things we announce in our lives, but we don't always announce like
Yeah.
this is a big change I'm making, everybody, or this is a big change, or I'm shifting this. And I'm curious as somebody who really cares about you and peripherally next to you, like
Mm-hmm.
how that has been for the good or the bad. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
All the above, right? Like, so I think one shift of like most people in my life, when I was at some of those key pivot points, like 4 or 5 years ago, most people had no idea. Like when I told my parents I was getting a
I
divorce,
was
like
shooketh.
their
Yeah.
jaws just dropped, like literally, and were speechless for like 3 minutes. I was like, am I gonna have to come back and have this conversation later? I really don't want to, right? And so part of this for me has also been learning to step out and be more vulnerable, be more open with people and seek that connection. And it's hard. There's the moments that hurts when you experience growth and people who once loved you
Oh
hate
gosh.
you or treat you as if you're dead, or when beliefs or values shift and change for the better. Like it things are just different. And I think there's just so many of those pivot points along the way that for me, the more I've embraced that, like the more connection I experience in my life, the more confidence, I grow. But those things aren't possible without the hard moments
Yeah.
too. And so sometimes it's like, it's interesting, right? If someone, and it's not like you're a different person, I'm the same person. Like, and I'm
Thankfully.
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
there's both that's there, but you just have to embrace that. And I think the other thing too, like, is just life happens. There's things that people go through and experience that I've gone through and experience that, like, you don't always openly share. Like Brene Brown talks about with vulnerability, like some things you don't openly share with other people, some things you do. And so some of that's intentional, and that creates interesting dynamics where it's like, I'm intentionally showing up in this way and people may not understand or know why, and that's
That's
okay.
okay.
I don't need you to
Ooh,
get it.
talk to me more about that. Because I
Mm,
do think not that many people live and love and believe that. There's sort of this belief that we just like live out loud and everyone's going to know you're getting divorced because
mhm,
you've complained about your marriage in a public setting or you
mhm.
have made it kind of known. Yeah, dig in a little bit more with me about this because I believe this.
Yeah,
I don't think a lot of people understand what you just said. So maybe you tell me a
yeah.
little bit more about what you mean about that.
Like, I think we can go through hard things for the right reasons that are like safe and connecting and aligned with our
Yes.
values. And so, like, when there's something, the first question is like, am I safe? Physically safe, emotionally safe. That's the priority. And then from there, I can ask myself, like, do I feel connected? Do I feel connected to myself? Do I feel connected to higher power, to other people around me? And like, what aligns with my values? What do I want? And for me, when I've made decisions based off of that, like I can go through really hard things
Mm.
and it brings confidence. What I found I don't want to do in life is go through really hard things that are unsafe, disconnecting, or don't align with my values. That creates misery and depression and anxiety.
Disconnect.
And so like I don't need to explain, other people don't need to get it.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually healthy sometimes for people not to get it, not
Mm.
to understand. Like I don't need them to agree with me.
Mm.
Understanding is also not agreement. Like we can have different perspectives, you can view things differently, and that creates healthy relationships where maybe we have boundaries around different things, and that creates a safer relationship.
Yeah. And can I say, quiet or unspoken or spoken, um, connection invites growth, not just for the person who's going through it, but the people who lean into that person. So like
Yeah.
whether you, and this will go a little broader than just you, but I'm saying, there are a lot of people who are making huge changes in their life that are sort of silently making decisions that impact decisions their future making or impact even their day-to-day living, right? Like
Hmm.
and if you've known this person for a long time and they've done it a certain way, the assumption, kind of this is why I share this quote, right, is that you're going to measure them the same way you've always measured them and you will
Hmm.
miss
Yeah.
the moment that's changed. Now, for me, it isn't really the person who's changing to necessarily tell you, see that I'm changing. But it is your responsibility as the friend or the loved one to recognize or get curious or to grow with them or and again, maybe not even understand, but seek to have an understanding about like measure them anew, right? Like that's
Hmm.
part of our job and like when we lean in, part of what I would consider like creating
Hmm.
belonging places, right, is that like you changed the dynamic, and instead of me being upset or hurt or pushing you away because you changed because we had a thing that was
Hmm.
this way, is to sort of seek to understand, get curious, I guess is the biggest thing that I want to say, like get curious about that. And I don't even mean like ask them why they got divorced or
Hmm.
ask them why they're having a faith crisis or ask them why they shifted, pivoted in their life, because quite frankly, like maybe they don't want to tell you that and maybe
Hmm.
it's not important. What I mean by get curious is this person is going through change and it's big or small compared to whatever they feel like it is in their life, and get curious and show up and continue to be consistent. And I think you will also grow. You will also stretch alongside that person. And either they will stay in your life or you'll stay in their life or you won't. Because I believe that people come in and come out of our lives
Yeah.
as we need to. But yeah, any thoughts about that? Do you agree? Do you see it that way differently?
Yeah. No, I agree fully. Like relationships have seasons. Some relationships are lifelong, some have a time and place. And the other thing I'd say about curiosity, like if you find yourself feeling like defensive or critical or judging someone else, like it's an opportunity to get curious, but also curious with yourself. Like, what about this makes me uncomfortable? What about this makes me judge someone else or want to treat them differently or pull back and shut down? And I think in relationships, that's where so much learning can happen. It's like, what does that say about me? And how
Mm,
can I learn from that to show up still like in a kind and healthy way? What work is there for me? And I think that's one of the beautiful things about relationships is we're not responsible to manage someone else's emotions or to get them to tell us or share with us what's going on. We're responsible to manage our own. And so when we can get really curious with ourselves and do our own work and show up in a healthy way, that creates the safety in the environment for intimacy to thrive. And by that, I mean like emotional connection. I mean honesty and often all these buzzwords, right?
yeah.
Where now
Yeah.
there's an impactful relationship that's there and we can lean into that together even when it's hard.
Yeah, I want to share kind of an example in my life, and maybe you can also share
Mhm.
um, in any relationship in your life. But I have had many of my friends. I grew up in a certain faith.
Mhm.
I'm still in that faith, but I have had gobs and gobs. I think more. I probably have more friends who have left the faith that I belong to than have stayed. Actually,
Mhm.
um, and that has been. I've kind of never had a problem with that. I've always just been like, you can believe whatever you believe. And the core thing for me about that, the curiosity that I had to come to and that I had to recognize maybe why I don't feel threatened when other people feel threatened when people leave is because I decided a long time ago that like, what is it that connects me to that person? And is it my faith that connects me to that person? Or is that just my meet cute? Is that how I just like met them? I met them at a college that's this, or I met them at a church building, and if it isn't about the whole of who they are, of how I know them, then this is just one example, I'm using faith, but then when that thing changes or goes away, that wasn't the only thing that I love about them.
Mhm.
Well, one thing that I found that was interesting is I decided that, and I have held that journey, and that has gifted me, I think, a lot of opportunity for many of my friends to just like stay friends when some of their other friends are just like, you have to, like, I met you and picked you up when you were this, and now you're not this, so you don't believe what I believe, so I'm letting you go, right?
Mhm.
But the interesting thing that I found is that when I could articulate that to my friends, not just assume that they knew that, when I could say to them, hey, I love you because of you, not because of school or because of church or because of hobby, but like, I like you and
Mhm.
I'm with you. It was amazing to me what happened in our relationship and our connection when they also realized like I can change and
Mhm.
I will still be loved by you. So to me, that is an example of what you're talking about getting curious about yourself, but also there was a lot of time that that was a silent decision that I had made. And I realized that sometimes um I needed to like actually tell the person in front of me or sit in front of me like I needed to
Mhm.
help them to know, and found that was really actually quite relieving for people to be validated or be told like it's okay to change. I think we sometimes feel like we're not allowed to change even though we are changing. We're not allowed. Yeah, we are having to be the same river that people step
Mhm.
into, and we have to show up a certain way in their expectation. I don't know if you have another example or thoughts about that, but
Yeah, I think an example about like kind of we're talking about roles too.
yeah.
It's like if the thought of going home for Thanksgiving dinner brings anxiety up for you because I'm going to be put in the same role that I was when I was 15 years old and I have to play my part, like, no, you don't. Right? And some of this is like learning to get curious, kind of as you were describing these relationships. And then when we can figure out what do I need to be safe? What do I need to stay connected to my family? We can hold boundaries. It's not about you need to change or you need to do this
Yeah.
different. It's about what do I need to keep myself in a healthy, good place and how am I going to respond differently? I think that's where in relationships, regardless if values shift or change or there's different belief systems, or then what happens is both people are kind of forced to do their own work that either you're going to lose a relationship, which hurts, which is I think why we avoid it sometimes. That's
Mm.
why we avoid being vulnerable because we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we can get hurt.
Yeah.
But when we put ourselves in that position, what can also happen is genuine connection, like choice for a relationship where someone's like, I want to help you feel safe.
Yeah.
I want to help you feel connected and loved. And you can do the same for them. We're like, this isn't about like what your political viewpoint is or what your religious viewpoint is. This, it's like, how do we create a safe relationship that's meaningful and loving and value based for both of us? And
Yeah.
I think that can change lives. That can change generations and families by doing that.
Yeah. I love that. One of the changes and transitions that you have gone through and have contributed to on like LinkedIn and other things is going from being like a couple married father to
Mm-hmm.
being a single father
Yeah.
of two girls, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
two daughters.
Yep.
And speaking of getting curious, I would love to know maybe some things you can share about what you've learned over the last few years about being a single parent, particularly a father to daughters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, my daughters are they are the best part of my life. And
Yeah.
there's, you could do a whole podcast episode on just this,
Yeah.
but like, there's so much around like the birth of my daughter and like the meaning they have in my life that's like literally changed me to the core. And like so much like working in a startup residential treatment center, and like it was so easy for me to consume my life with other things
Mm.
and my profession and work, and to emotionally avoid and to avoid conflict and things. And so when I got divorced, and this is something I've been working on for a while before, but one of the things it did is it forced change. It forced me to be a better dad. It forced me to be present and to work through the hard moments and sit with my kids in the hard moments and the good moments. And sometimes those things really sting. It's like when you're crying yourself and recognizing this is really hard. When you're 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds asking questions like, I don't know how to answer this for you, but I see your pain and I'm going to sit in this with you.
Yeah.
And that changes me. And it also, I think, changes them, and seeing like I don't have to hide this from them. We can have a healthy relationship, and to be more present, to
Mm-hmm.
lean in, and to shift perspective. So that's one of the things I think that happens with divorce oftentimes with people in general. It's like you're forced to become someone different. It's an opportunity to do that or to stay the same and
Right.
recreate the same pattern.
Yeah.
But also, like, you don't have to get divorced. You don't have to go through a crisis point to do that, to start taking time for yourself or developing friendships.
Creating a hobby. I think
Exactly.
sometimes like people have to like carve out. I'm like, you can carve out within.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not idolizing change through
Mhm.
like heartache, but I do think um being a single parent,
Yeah.
even if you're co-parenting. So I'm not
Mhm.
trying to get rid of like
Yeah.
a co-parenting feature, but I'm
Yep.
saying individual parents that are
Hmm.
doing it. I think like I've never experienced that myself, but as I watch people do that, I think, yeah, you sort of have to like, especially if you have like a 50-50, you sort of have to show up like
Hmm.
100% some of the time, and then you're not there at all some of the time, which causes its own interesting
Yeah.
dynamic. So like you said, it sort of forces when
Hmm.
you're 100% in it parent, and then the dynamic itself changes, like you are sort of forced to change, and how you
Hmm.
decide how to do that, I think talks a lot about who you're becoming and your character and sort of the work you're doing, right? There's no
Yeah.
blame in that when I'm saying that. Hopefully
Hmm.
people don't hear that. But it does sort of like you can't avoid it.
Yeah. And it's the weirdest experience to like, both as a parent, to love being with your kids and want to
Mm,
spend more time with them, and then to feel exhausted sometimes and be like, this break is nice, or like, I miss my kids, but I'm enjoying my alone time.
yeah.
And I'm engaging in new hobbies or interests. And it's like suddenly you have like almost like different lives or kind of different worlds. And it's learning how to balance that and integrate it. That does force change on both sides of like, I have to
Yes.
work on myself individually. I have to do this as a parent, which for me has been a really healthy and good thing. I think like I'm not glorifying divorce. Divorce sucks, right? There's so
Yeah.
many things about it
Yeah.
that's hard and terrible. And just with anything in life, like it doesn't have to be all that. There can be good things. We don't have to, I'd say this, and we don't have to turn like poop into a rose. We don't have to make something
Yes.
terrible into something amazing, but we can also love who we are without justifying how.
Yeah. Well, I had this conversation a while ago with both divorced parents and married parents, and I remember the married parents being like, I sometimes kind of wish I had like an on and an off week. Like, I love my kids, but I would
Yeah.
like to like, and the divorced, the single mom was saying, yeah, this and this, like
Yeah.
the grass is green where you water it, right?
Yeah.
Really not like, and are there some silver linings to like crisis if you look for them and find them? Yes, right?
Mhm.
Like, and we can't deny those. I think sometimes there's guilt and loss and shame that gets complicated in that. If I ever think like, oh man, I'm kind of grateful that I have some time away, like I think that's part of living, but I also think that's
Yeah.
part of recognizing and pulling it out and what is that about and how and examining it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so overall, I mean, we've talked just about a few of your changes and transitions, but like, if you could look back, like if you look back over I mean, you're still a growing and changing person, but you've had some big changes. If as you look back over the last few years, are there some life lessons that you have been able to pull out? I mean, you're really good at writing a sort of LinkedIn message. If you were to LinkedIn message us,
Yeah.
what are some
Yeah.
of the things you feel like you have learned or that like, it's taught you?
Mm-hmm. So many things. I think the biggest thing is like I know nothing.
Okay,
Like, I
okay,
mean, like whatever I think I know, I probably don't know.
okay.
And the more I learn, like it's just learning to be more curious and listen longer and really go back of just experience different things of life, being willing to question. Adam Grant talks about this, like think again,
Think
like
again.
question what you know before you're certain about it. The more certain you are that you're right, the more likely you are to be wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big thing. And then just life experiences, like so many different life experiences that I've had, like have taught me different things, like experiencing like personal hard things, seeing other people, you love and care about go through hard things. It changes you to the core. And sometimes you don't want that change. And so
Mm.
I think one thing that I've observed and learned is like people who I'd consider like the most courageous people, like heroes, they never wanted it and they never had a choice and it was their only option.
When they come by hard fought, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I am, and maybe we have this in common, Kyle. I think we do, but like, I think I'm attracted. I think I'm fiercely like want to sit in the spaces with the souls who have unwillingly endured pain that has helped them to become resilient in a way they never wanted, but they did. Like, I'm
Mhm.
attracted to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just getting to know people
Yeah.
at that level.
If you don't know their pain points, sometimes I think, how do you know how they got to where they are, right?
Hmm.
Like, there's a little bit to be said about, you said, listen long enough. You've said it twice, which I agree. And I
Hmm.
want to say it again because I want to make sure people got the message
Hmm.
um, through the whole, yeah. Like, if you don't know some of the deep things that I have felt or the pain points that I've had, you can know me, but you can't really connect at a level. You don't have to have
Hmm.
experienced that same thing, but like it's part of my becoming,
Yeah.
right? Like, so like to
Hmm.
sit and listen long enough to, or to be with me long enough, or to like, um, uh, yeah, sit next to me. Brene Brown has this whole thing about,
Hmm.
looking down the hole and being like, you want a sandwich? And like, versus like, I'm,
Hmm.
I'm climbing down the ladder, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think, there's something really powerful in
Hmm.
relationships about that. And everybody is going through something, right? So the
Yeah.
gift you give all of your relationships is to not assume that you know where people are in their journey, is to measure them anew each time you meet them and to get curious
Yeah.
and talk to them. Um, all right. One of my last questions is like, um, when you think of belonging,
Hmm.
like, what does that mean to you, or how do you experience that in your life, or what is the value of that, or yeah.
Yeah. Um, Connected to that and like just thoughts based off the conversation too. I think one of the most powerful words I think you can tell someone else is I believe you
Oof.
or I believe in you. Um, I think that creates healing. And when I think about belonging, um, I think it's not trying to fit in. It's not trying to find a group of people to be around or people accept me or which online thing, am I getting?
Yeah.
It's it's about finding love within myself. And when I can find that, there's the connection that happens with other people. And sometimes it happens maybe with nature. It can
Mm,
happen with myself. It can happen with spirituality or God or people close to you in your life. And I think that's when I'm talking about connection, that's the type of connection that I'm meeting, that you can find that belonging. You can find that purpose within yourself, whatever that means for you, to belong, to
yeah,
exist, to have purpose.
yeah. Yeah, that resonates so much to me. I think when we I've said a few times on this podcast, but like when you are known to be known, when you
Mhm,
like know who you are,
mhm,
when you're comfortable with your space,
mhm,
the people and things that come in and out of that don't so much impact. It doesn't mean you don't feel or grieve or have loss, right? But it means it doesn't impact your whole life to the core, meaning
mhm,
I'm going to be steady. I'm going to be, it's one of the things that I feel like is probably why people, like you shared how surprised your parents are. It's
mhm.
probably why some people, I would guess, why some people in your life are probably surprised by these changes or these things. It's because you seemingly seem to have this sort of steady, like co- that quiet confidence, that dignity. Is that true? I mean, I see it and
Mhm.
observe it, and I'm curious, is that actually how you feel, and this is how you're operating through life and how you're able to manage and do the things that you do?
Yeah, I I think it's both. Like that's a natural gift that I have, is having like a safe, calm, non-reactive presence.
Mm,
That when people first meet me, oftentimes it's like, who is this guy? Like what is he thinking? But like when people really get to know me, there's like often deep relationships that are there, but that takes time. And so I think I'm a person just like anyone else,
yeah.
right? And so, of course, there's anxieties and fears and insecurities and ups and downs of life that come up, and confidence ebbs and flows. Um, but that quietness, that stillness, that's where I've found um, more connection within myself.
And I want to just be clear to say, when I'm talking about this, just so you, I think you might know that I'm saying this, but maybe the
Hmm.
audience doesn't. I'm not actually talking about like I'm a quiet person and I'm not
Hmm.
making noise, right? I'm talking
Yeah.
about like because I have seen you maybe as dynamic as I don't know. Like I've seen
Hmm.
you on lots of out of work, whatever. I
Yeah.
like know you, not just like, oh, I'm this
Yeah.
quiet therapist,
Hmm.
you know. I'm
Yeah.
talking about like I'm glad you acknowledge like it's a gift. I'm talking about the like anchor of your soul that's just like
Hmm.
gritted. That is just like I in any room in any situation, I know you're human. I know you have feelings. I know you,
Hmm.
but like if there's something that I love about you, it's your consistency that whenever I know I'm gonna see you, and I imagine I just know. I don't even have to ask people that are in your world and that swim around you that that has got to be so comforting and connecting for somebody to be consistent and grounded that shows up that can adapt like obviously
Hmm.
can do the thing can feel the pain but but it's like it's just like so I just want to gift it back to you and say like it's noticeable. I know it's hard earned. I know you've done the work to like show
Hmm.
up that way. um I know that like if you want to gift your pain and you want to talk about it, you know where you're safe and where you can and don't feel the
Hmm.
need to if you don't, which is also really I
Yeah.
wish more people had that ability to not
Hmm.
just spill their stuff everywhere, right? Because there's something to be said about places and spaces. I also want to say before we end that I'm really grateful for you in my like belonging place.
Hmm.
I feel like I learned a lot in observing you and being next to you and learning from you. Particularly, you said um, that you got to know and were really good at family systems. I feel like Kyle, I probably never told you this, but I probably learned more as a therapist about family systems and things like working alongside you than anything I learned in college or anything that I did before. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And part of that was we got to teach each other, and part of
Mm-hmm.
that was just observation of like your skill set and being able to see like how you entered. And also a lot of that was being able to, and I feel really grateful and I feel jealous for people who don't get this, but got to really kind of see how your mind worked through a lot of things, because we got to do a lot of collaborating and creating tools, which not everybody gets to do as a therapist. So we got
Yeah.
to sit in committees and we got to like talk about it and look at it and examine it and turn it over and be like, okay, well, what is this and what is that? I feel deeply to this day that I am changed as far as how I think about family therapy and how I want to do it with people and how I hold a container because of that. And that like work relationship spilled out outside of work into like a very curiosity of like who you are and what you're doing and following you. I mean, obviously that you're here on my podcast. So as far as like me, I have wandered through life a lot feeling too much or too loud or to whatever. I never felt that with you. I always felt like there was permission to be as big as I wanted to be, like to be as to show up, to self-correct. Like your presence also gave me
Mm-hmm.
permission to just like self-correct, to be like, okay, you're at this level, we probably can be at this level.
Mm-hmm.
I found it very like yin and yang, I said before, and a really important woven piece into like who I am and who I've become. I feel like I take a little bit of you and who you are and the type of therapist you are into my like into my job that I'm at now. And when you left Telos, like continue to sort of like show up with like what you brought to the table. And so I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really kind of you to say. I appreciate that. And yeah, it's similar, right? Just experience of appreciation for you and how you've affected my life and grown. And like, I think I don't know if I've ever told you this, but like one small example, I think this is one of the first times we ever met. It was like in orientation at Telos.
Okay.
And like, I just remember we were like interacting with something. It's like this anxiety provoking time with like staff and therapists are like, who is this? What's going
This is
on?
why we didn't have keys to our
Yeah,
offices.
probably didn't even know if we had an office at that point. But
That's another story.
yeah, that is another story. And, but
Uh,
I just remember there was such high energy, and I was like, "Who is this person?" I was like, "I don't know how to have a conversation right now." But you did something that shifted. Like I remember they had lunch, and they were like, "You guys can go get lunch," and I was like, "Oh, I'll go up in a minute." And before I knew it, you had like gone up and you had brought every single person in their lunch. You're like handing everyone their plate and their food, and it like shifted my experience. I was like, here I am thinking about myself in this moment, and Kylee is like just service oriented, thinking about everyone else. And that just helped me see the like use that getting out of the box, right? Of
yeah.
seeing something in a different way and people's humanity and seeing how to connect differently, where that's the type of personalities oftentimes I work well with, is like energetic, creative mind and seeing things from different perspectives. And that's, I think, for anyone, right? Like the more you can surround yourself with people who are different than you,
Mm.
but you have shared values and connections, like I think that creates synergy, that creates good outcomes and good relationships that
Yeah, long lasting, right?
exactly.
And that you're going sort of in the same direction. We're like
Hmm.
for the good. I think it helps that we are people, right?
Yeah.
Like even if we have different personalities about that, and we like really want to help people heal. We really want people
Hmm.
to have healthy relationships. We really want people to have the best healthy relationship is with themselves. I think
Yeah.
regardless of our personalities or our backgrounds, when you have sort of this united core values, I think we can do a lot of good. Well,
Yeah.
I'm grateful for you. So you places they can find you. You're involved with Stiry, and it's just
Hmm.
Stiry.com, right?
Yep.
And on all the platforms.
Hmm.
And your private practice.
Yeah. So impactfulcounseling.com,
Okay.
at impactful Kyle,
Okay.
Kyle Barth on LinkedIn.
Okay. We'll put all this stuff down there. You guys reach out to him. Are you taking clients right now?
Yep.
Okay.
Hmm.
So if you're in the Utah,
Yep.
North Utah area, no, I guess that's
Yeah.
like
I have an
Logan.
office
I
in
guess
Lehigh
you're
and
okay, Lehigh.
Kaysville.
Oh, I didn't
So
know in Lehigh. Okay, that's good
yep.
for me to know actually.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Kyle. We appreciate you, and we look forward to more good that you're putting out in the world.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank
Kylee.
you.